Mania Sambojjhanga so that Jagazuma Sambodhi Anga Sambodhi so that Boko Shini Jet Bedo they very pure. Piece of previous songs, this are labor, Tijaunian to a paloshi and all, this are labor, dinner to Parma, theatre, download to a Chauntia, this are labor, DG, Chauntia, Pava, DG, Chauntia. Tuji Tato Mahopa to go to the Goa Taukure, a say by the Shiva de Divaria. Really, Piokia, however. The Niapin level somebody to the Poga. The Gulu Boba Meti. This one, I told the Ubatana since it debuted. Each piece of the car. It is a liver, dear Tito. But my Uba Bagabe and Nina took her me and beat up 20 hours. The book is busy. Ria Menya Poyane, neighbor Yamo Jude Camaro. Chongina neighbor Yamo Jude Janet Dogatisa Baichati, Turia Sapemu, Megatisa Puamu, the Alulu PC daughter. Eluti Dia Poco. Somebody to let cover it. Somebody, baby, so this I live at the Madasura. Would you sort of baby so over the Yava? A baby so did you people Suraga? Do you a John Tokuri Harry, a John in a Tokuri Harry. A Conabaro she did a man. The was inside the body. A dinyango, Tambodi, a dinyango, you see, Pupong, Peter Tokuri, say by name. This I live at Tidu, you see, this I live at Tidu, a John Tokuri. Is Palilu Angalu cover. Did somebody Anga Pongoli say Sambojjhanga did Pali don't know killer, eh?
Yesterday, Sayadawgyi spoke about the word Sambodhi, which is part of the larger word Sambojjhanga. Sambojjhanga is made up of Sambodhi and Anga. And Sayadawgyi explained about Sambodhi last night. Sambodhi is knowledge which is able to know completely the Four Noble Truths. Without this, Sambodhi must be present to know the Four Noble Truths. One can't, that has to be present, but it is not the only thing that is involved in the realization of the Four Noble Truths. So, together with knowledge, there are other components. And so Sambodhi is this knowledge which is able to know completely the Four Noble Truths. Or another way of explaining the meaning of Sambodhi is that it refers to someone who practices the forerunner path to completion, so that vipassana knowledge matures stage by stage, and one comes to know the Four Noble Truths. So first of all, with the before completion of vipassana knowledge and realization of all the Four Noble Truths, with the forerunner path, Pubabhaga Magga, one accomplishes the first two truths. One knows the truth of suffering and eliminates its cause, and develops this forerunner path. But with the realization of Nibbana, the remaining two truths, the cessation of suffering, and the path, development of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, these are automatically accomplished. So one who knows this, who knows the Four Noble Truths completely, is called Sambodhi. And this word prefix, samanta, it has a meaning comprehensively or completely, knowing all that is surrounding. So there are 7 causes which support this knowledge called Sambodhi. And if we take Sambodhi to mean knowledge, then these total of 7 factors are supporting factors. And if we take Sambodhi to mean a person, then it is a quality that person has, or a factor of that person. And that word in Pali is called anga. So together in Pali, Sambodhi and anga, when they're combined, those two words are combined, it becomes Sambojjhanga. That's the word in Pali.
This are Libare Masurichi, Maria Bugere. No by Lodra, this are 2 years Congo, little detail, the lots of Lolo Bobby. To a Imnanetia, Imnamianusia, Gone, Piezone, this are Nabave, Sudavoli. The lot of detail. Jabu Nawane body. A Lolo Magaro, she by Togadis and Duriatisa. Keep yet the mea, Guria Potomia, Togatisari. Niaja, Nayasa, Tia, Dia, Hari. Eraria, Uloroze, Paisha, Tia, Mayari. To Pitumisa, Mamshuya Matthew. Mamadi, already shouted the Adama, Tayahu, Downdahu, Swellamhu, Tari Pitorava. CAG, a Chowny Pitorava. The Poru was a Dugatisa, the Tiari, a good trip Tanina, Shulu, Painchavi, Dimian Dwavi. Ria may shape ye, Popaga, Meti, Piezon Davi solution. CAG, a chow to ya this our level, Pemukes a little PG dollar. Tiringa Nidora, Popaga, Met level, Povida Pietware, Mania. This are Levaria, Duga this our direct. Dilata never Jandisa Doma Pemu, Saimu, Guamu, Lulukisa Pizidora. အဲ့ဒါမနေ့ကပြောခဲ့ပါတယ်အခုပုဗ္ဗဘကမက်တီပြည့်စုံသွားလို့ရှိရင်တနည်းအားဖြင့်ယုံနာပိုက်ခြားသိမှုကအစဝိပဿနာနဲ့အစဉ်စဉ်ဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ပုဗ္ဗဘကမက်တီအစဉ်စဉ်ဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ရင့်ကျက်ပြည့်စုံသွားတဲ့အခါခုနနိရောဓသစ္စာဆိုတာပေါ့လေနိရောဓသစ္စာအရိယမညာဖူညာနဲ့မျက်မှောက်ပြုတည်သွားမှာပဲမြင်လိုက်ကြားလိုက်နားလိုက်စားလိုက်စသည်ပေါ့လေအာယုန်တွေရောအာရမဏိကတွေရောရှင်းစပြဖြစ်နေတဲ့ရည်စည်းကြောင်းကြီးလိုဖြစ်နေတဲ့ပောတအဲ့ဒါကြီးအဲ့ပြီးတော့အပောတဆိုတာပေါ့လေမဖြစ်ဖဲနဲ့ရက်သွားမှာပောတဆိုတာယုံနာနေဖြစ်နေတာဓာတုကသစ္စာတွေပဲအဲ့ဒါကြီးရက်သွားတာပေါ့လေဒါနိရောဓသစ္စာပဲအဲ့ဒီနိရောဓသစ္စာစိုက်သွားမှာပဲဒီကတော့အဲ့ဒီကကြတော့ပုဗ္ဗဘကမေကနေပြီးတော့အရိယာမေတဲ့အရိယာမေကဖြူချင်းမြင့်တဲ့နိဗ္ဗာန်ကိုဒါရိုက်တွေ့လိုက်တဲ့ဘေကကြီးလည်းပဲပေါ်လာတော့တာပဲဒီမှာအဲ့ဒီကကြမှာအဝိဒိတဒုက္ခဆိုတာကောင်းနားလည်လာမှာစောစောကတော့ဝိဒိတဒုက္ခတွေနဲ့ပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒီပဲရောက်သွားတဲ့ခါကျတော့အဝိဒိတသုခတနည်းအားဖြင့်စန္တိသုခဆိုတာယောဂီကကိုယ်တိုင်နားလည်သွားမှာပါအမိမတတ်တောင်မှထူးခြားတဲ့ခံစားမှုလေးအေးချမ်းတဲ့ခံစားမှုလေးတော့ဒါတော့သိသွားတာပဲ
Among the Four Noble Truths, as far as the two supramundane truths, one has to know how they are good. One has to know that they are two very delightful, noble truths. But the work that we do at first concerns the first and second noble truth, the two worldly truths. Whatever arises in one's body is the truth of suffering, dukkha satcha. We have to know this. We have to discern this. If we don't observe whatever arises in our being, then we won't know this truth of suffering. We won't know, or will know in the wrong way. There will be craving, tanha, and clinging, upadana. And thus there will be the cause of suffering. But when the truth of suffering arises, because one observes it with the practice of satipatthana, then there is knowledge. Knowledge arises. And this is the development of the forerunner path, Pubbapagamaga. And at that moment of knowledge, one is able to dispel the cause of suffering. One realizes momentary cessation, tadanga nirodha, and one also develops this forerunner path. So as Sayadawgyi mentioned yesterday, with one action of knowing the first truth, the remaining three are accomplished. One knows the truth of suffering, dispels its cause, realizes cessation, and develops the path. So because the forerunner path is developed, and vipassana knowledge develops stage by stage, when this vipassana knowledge matures, then one realizes nirodha satcha, the truth of cessation. One realizes nibbana, or knows nibbana, with the noble path. So whatever arises in our being, whether we're throughout our day we're eating, drinking, lifting, moving, placing, tasting, touching, and so on, this all, one thing after another, flows like a river. This is called pavata. The sense experiences that happen all the time. Nibbana is called apavata because it is the cessation of this flowing river. So this is nirodha. And one reaches nirodha when there's the cessation of the sense experiences completely. So noble path arises, this pure, clean, noble path. This arises which sees nibbana, and then one will understand very well what is meant by avedita sukha. So before this, I didn't understand what Sayadawgyi said the last point. I can't remember. But before this, we understand in a way Santi Sukha and Avedita Sukha. This is a very special type of happiness.
Buddha ga du ko bai atou saka li takku tau twa pare sukha. Sukha so de saka li tau twa de. Sukha soda chanda de pare. Chanda de soda wantara ba be. Kina aya bi ro khare ko nire thabo myo ba be. Wanta wa myo phye bi ro nira. Tattva de soda adi chanda jai ja de. Sukha kama dukkha patikula de. Sukha ye sanje be siye ra ma kaung na ro ma jai ja bu. Chanda wantara ro jai ja de. Da loka ye tabawa be. Tattva ye tabawa be. To adi dukkha ga ro tu ga roနှစ်မျိုးရှိပါတယ်သူကတော့အာယုံကောင်း6ပါးနဲ့ထိတွေ့ပြီးတော့ချမ်းသာတာကတစ်မျိုးပါဠိလိုကတော့ဝိရိယစုခလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်အာယုံကောင်း6ပါးနဲ့မထိတွေ့ရဘဲနဲ့အေးချမ်းတဲ့ချမ်းသာကတစ်မျိုး2မျိုး2မျိုးခွဲဟောထားပါတယ်ဒီနေ့အဲ့ဒီ2မျိုးပိဋကရှိမှတင်ပြပြီးတော့ဘယ်မျိုးစားကောင်းတယ်ဆိုတာပေါ့လေယောဂီတွေကဆုံးဖြတ်ဖို့ပါပဲ
The Buddha used the word sukha. Sukha means peaceful and therefore happiness, satisfaction. Beings like this peaceful happiness. Sukha kama dukkha patikula. Beings don't like suffering, and they like happiness and peace. This is the way of the world. This is the way beings are. This sukha has two varieties, and one involves contact with good sense objects, and this is called Vedita sukha. And the second type does not involve any contact with these 6 sense objects, good 6 sense objects, and it is peaceful. So today Sayadawgyi will explain about these two kinds of sukha. And the yogis simply need to decide for themselves which one of these is good.
Burma Musagaro Sejay Ayo body Chisia Logisia Gone Mingwin Lali Sanjime Ayo Taya Choire at the lady Natongera Mingwin Lali Kilo Siga Ginu Bido Wanda the Loboli Taya Choire at the lady Natongera Ginura Go Sanjime Lay at the lady Abiana Jarishi Ginu Nijara Timbian and Nali Shuasha Yalishi Ginura Sejay Yada lady Sayadawgyi and let Ginura Sejay a tea to Machane to Nunu Tuduli Buddha Karale Ele that tea to body. Time of Yalushi, Korea to Izuri to Nisu Kankedo. You be Jonalushi at Pigoma Vesra, a lady Cheja. Down Gugala Yogi Atodeka. Tauli Taina never Korea Makanabri Pola, she should like Jonasra. Deconsider Neja. They are not Roma, two town like Nayla. Era really silly, deconsider Arneja. Korea to Izori, Majadi Harry Pola Lucia. To Izori, they don't let her near Tanya Carbolito. Always solid and new papa grady. Dalili. Puma tea drake, Dalivoli, Dali Checha. Sigu and Sigu Gong lady was Siguya Iron lady, Sigu Yeni Alucia. Ginuni, the Volidama. The Iron Gong Chop Pan, Sozida, my body. Gilugona, Natolugona, Shulugona, Salugona, Titulugona, Sigulugona. Kanzabudi Pillar of it. Eraga Udita Sukha look over. Sejay Ayong Chaupan, Titwi video. Kanzaya de Chanda, the local Didari Era Jada. Suka Karma, so I do Chanda, you were a good a check me out of it. The love way to do the Lamira. Pudamia Swahara Eddie Udita Suka, whatever common knowledge. Udita Suka, a pity, will common knowledge. Chanda a sim of hope, who's for our body. Knowledge. Titi Suka, our body. Say, I already see they don't know Chanda Lura. Through Pyongo Kajara, Uri Namadoka, the room she was here, Kajara, Siri, Janira. Chanda, Joni, the Pokoha. Siri, Joni, the Jomi Solushi. Take one year away. Nago, whatever say, Mama, I can't ask them, she don't. The shoot, they don't go away. Era Udita Duka Udiva Duka, Hoji Tibido, Tinchibido, Swimmer Lily, Bovido, Sayaduka, Yodi liver. Era Gomesafia, great tweet, however, Udita Sukas Ranina. Our Udita Sukas Raga Kanzamu Mapavene. Mingwin La Lady, Chibito Ginura Mulepo. Taya Chode, the lady not only Ginura Mulepo. Timpian and a lady Shubito Ginura Mulepo. Sejay Yadari, Savito Ginura Mulepo, a tea tweet. Bahida tea tweet, Poma tea tweet, Elo tea tweet video. ချမ်းသာမျိုးလည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးစိတ်ကူးရင်နဲ့ချမ်းသာမျိုးလည်းမဟုတ်ဘူးချမ်းသာတစ်မျိုးရှိတယ်အဝိဒိတသုခတဲ့အာယုံကောင်း6ပါးနဲ့အထူးသဖြင့်ကာမဂုဏ်5ပါးနဲ့မထိတွေ့ရဘဲနဲ့ပေါ့လေထူးခြားတဲ့ချမ်းသာတစ်မျိုးပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒါအဝိဒိတသုခအဲ့ဒါကိုစန္တိသုခလို့လည်းခေါ်ပါတယ်ရာဂဒေါသအစရှိတဲ့ကိလေသာတွေလှုပ်ရှားမှုမရှိခဲ့မှတော့မရှိဘဲနဲ့ပေါ့လေငြိမ်းချမ်းတဲ့ချမ်းသာတစ်မျိုးပေါ့လေဒီမှာစန္တိသုခလို့လည်းခေါ်ပါတယ်
The first kind of sukha is what we experience when we encounter an object that we like. So there may be a beautiful scene, or we may see something, someone of the opposite sex, or there might be a pleasant sound, or a beautiful fragrance. And when we look at the scene, this beautiful scene, this beautiful visual object, then the mind feels clear and peaceful. The mind feels... and when one hears this pleasant sound, it makes the mind feel at ease, feel calm and clear. So when we get this pleasant object that one likes, getting touch that one likes, for example, when we're cold, then it feels good to have something warm. When we're too warm, it feels good to have something cold. Or when one has been sitting for a long time, then it feels good to change the posture. Of course, nowadays, yogis don't sit long like that anymore. They shift here and there very easily. And even during the Dhamma talk, the yogis clasp their knees together and gaze here and there. They have no patience at all. When there's discomfort, people like comfort. And so people like the touch of clothing, for example, the gentle touch of clothing. People like the touch, males and females like this type of touch among themselves. So, and also people like to imagine things. People like to, having an imaginary object also makes people feel happy. People feel some peaceful happiness with this. So these 6 types of objects, things which are good to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, imagine. When we experience these, there's a feeling. And this feeling is called vedita sukha, the happiness or peaceful happiness that comes from experiencing a sense object. And people think very highly of these, but the Buddha understood very well this experiential happiness, vedita sukha, and he understood what is wrong with it. And he said that it is not true peace. It is called titi sukha. That means that it's established only when that object, that good object that we like, is there. But when that good object changes or goes away, then what we experience is viparinama dukkha. We experience the suffering of how things change. And sometimes people even really, when they're very attached to some type of experience, when they no longer have it, some people even die of the sorrow that they feel. So when one thinks that this type of sense experience is so good that one wants more and more, works to get more and more, then one only encounters more and more suffering. On the other hand, avedita sukha does not involve any type of sense experience. It doesn't involve any beautiful view, any pleasant sound, any fragrance, any taste or touch. No external touch, no touch between male and female, no thinking, no imagining. It's not a happiness that comes from contacting any of these objects. So it's a special type of happiness that is completely separate from sense contact. And it is also called Santi Sukha. And it's called Santi Sukha because there's no disturbance due to greed, hatred, and the other kilesas. It's a very cool, peaceful happiness.
လူတွေဆိုတာစိတ်ကြိုက်စွန့်ပစ်เสียအာယုန်ကြီးရှာကြတာပဲမြင်ဝင်အလှလေးတွေပြီးတော့ချက်သားချွေးတဲ့အတန်လေးတွေအနတ်အသက်တွေအရသာတွေအထီးတွေ့တွေဆိုတာပေါ့လေစိတ်ကြိုက်အာယုန်ကြီးရှာတဲ့အခါမှာအဲ့ဒီအာယုန်ကြီးကစိတ်ကြိုက်လိုက်တဲ့ပုံကိုယ်တွေကိုဖန်ဆားထားတာပွားလို့မရတော့ဘူး ဒါရမှကျင့်နိုင်မယ်ဆိုတဲ့အနေမျိုးဖြစ်သွားတာပဲသို့တော့ဘယ်လောက်ပဲစိတ်ချအာယုံဖြစ်ဖြစ်ကြာတော့လေရိုးသွားတာပါပဲမြင်ဝင်လာလေဘယ်လောက်ပဲကောင်းပါလေလို့ဆိုမယ်လို့ဘယ်လောက်ဘယ်နှစ်နာရီလောက်သူစိတ်ကြည့်နိုင်မလဲဘယ်နည်းလောက်စိတ်ကြည့်နိုင်မလဲကြာတော့လေရိုးသွားတာပဲဒါချွေတဲ့အတန်လေးတွေဒီတိုင်းပဲအနံ့လေထုံနေအရသာလေးထိတွေ့လေထုံနေလေးကောင်းမှာ ရိုးရိုးထီးတွေ့ဖုံမထီးတွေ့ဒါရိုးသွားတာပဲကြာတော့တမျိုးရိုးသွားတယ်တမျိုးဆန်းကြတဲ့အတွက်စိတ်လိုချလှုပ်ထားတဲ့နေရာဌာနတွေမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လိန်ဖောက်ပြန်မှုတွေဟာအဲ့ဒီပြဿနာတွေဟာဖြေရှင်းလို့မရနိုင်အောင်ဖြစ်သွားတာပဲဒီတော့စိတ်ကြိတ်အာယုန်တွေလိုက်လို့ရှိရင်ဒီမှာ ဒါရမှကျင့်နိုင်မယ်ဆိုတော့ယာဂမီတွေတောက်လုံနေတာပဲမရရင်တတယ်ရလို့ရှိရင်စိတ်တရားကြွလာတာပါစိတ်ကြမဖြစ်လို့ရှိရင်ဒေါသမီတွေပေါ့လေမကြေမနပ်စိတ်ဖြစ်တာစိတ်ဆိုးတာမုန်းတာညှိုးတာဒေါသမီတွေလည်းတောက်လာတာပါကာမဂုဏ်ရဲ့အပြစ်တွေကိုမမြင်တော့ဒါတွေအဟုတ်ထင်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေ မိုက်မဲနဲ့ပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒီမောဟမီးတွေလည်းတောက်လောင်နေတာပဲရိုးရိုးပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အဲ့ဒီယာဂဒေါသမောဟကိလေသာတွေအလဲအလဲနဲ့တောက်လောင်နေတာပဲမောဟမီးကတော့အများအားပါနေပါတယ်တမန်သူလောင်မှလည်းမသိဘူးဘာလို့ဆိုတော့သူကမိကိုထွက်တဲ့မီးမှမဟုတ်ပဲ မိကုန်းမပါဘဲနဲ့ပြင်းပြထန်ထန်လောင်နေပြီတဲ့အတွင်းကလောင်လာပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒီမိတွေလောင်နေတာအဲ့ဒီအတွင်းမိတွေငြိမ့်သွားမှအေးချမ်းတာအတွင်းမိတွေမငြိမ့်တော့ဘလောက်ပဲအာယုံကောင်းနေရနေကြာတော့ရိုးပြီးတော့လူပြဿနာတွေချုပ်ထွေးအောင်ဖြစ်လာတာပဲတမန်ဒီတော့ ဝိရိဒသုခဆိုတော့လည်းပဲကောင်းတော့ကောင်းပြီမလို့ပြဿနာမျိုးစုံနဲ့ရှုပ်ထွေးပြီးတော့ခုနအပူတွေပဲတခါတည်းလွှမ်းမိုးသွားတာပဲအဲ့ဒါဒီနားလေရပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ခံစားမှုမရှိတဲ့ချမ်းသာကတော့အဲ့ဒါမျိုးမရှိဘူးအဲ့ဒါမျိုးတော့ငြိမ့်တယ်စိတ်ကြိုက်အမြင်ကောင်းကြားကောင်းနားကောင်းရတာကောင်းအထီးတွေ့ကောင်းခေါ်တဲ့ ကာမဂုဏ်ချမ်းသာမျိုးကိုမြင်ကြနာစာထိတွေ့ပြီးတော့ခံစားတဲ့သဘောမျိုးတော့မရှိဘူးအဲ့ဒီချမ်းသာမျိုးကိုမြတ်စွာဘုရားကိုယ်တိုင်ရှာဖွေပြီးတော့တွေ့ထားတာစိတ်ကူးရင်ချမ်းသာမဟုတ်ဘူးတကယ်ရှိတာပါအခုတရားထုတ်နေတာဟာအဲ့ဒီယာဒေါသမောဟမီးတဖြည်းဖြည်းအေးပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေ အဲ့ဒီရဲ့အစာ agent Kansamu, agent Yada the Mu, agent Chanda Yu Pola.
Human beings search for the sense objects that they like. They search for these things, such as a beautiful thing to look at, pleasant sound, pleasant smell, taste, touch. They search for these objects, and the objects that one desires capture one. They bind one so that one can't pull away. But in time, although one gains the object that one wants, in time, these become boring. They're no longer interesting to us. So then we want to have, for example, how many hours can you look at a beautiful view? How many hours can you listen to a pleasant sound? The same thing with smells, taste, touch, even between the opposite sex. So people get bored with the experiences, and one wants one kind of experience after another. So eventually this leads to many problems, including we think it means group sex, what Sayadawgyi spoke about, Lain Paupyam Mu. But basically it leads to sexual indulgence that is outside of the bounds of reasonableness, outside of the bounds of what is right. And if one follows and goes after what one likes, then this fire of lust is burning in oneself. And when one doesn't get what one wants, then one feels depressed. When one gets what one wants, then one feels elated. And there's also the fire of anger, dissatisfaction, not liking what we have. And there's also the fire of moha, because one doesn't see the faults of sense pleasures. For ordinary people, these three fires of raga, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion, are burning in turn, one after another. There's always the fire of delusion involved. Because one doesn't know that one is burning. These are fires that don't emit any smoke, but they burn intensely inside of one. And only when these fires die down will one feel peaceful. There are many problems that come from these fires burning. So although experiential happiness, Vedita Sukha, is good, it burns us. It has a certain heat, and it can burn. So on the other hand, the happiness that doesn't involve any sense experiences doesn't have any heat like this. The 5 sense objects are not involved. So that is the happiness that the Buddha himself searched for and found. It's not something imagined. The practice that we are doing now is to cool the fires of lust and anger, greed and hatred, slowly, gradually, and then the cool peace of Nibbana will arise.
A good dear Atodira ha Yagadosa Moha, a Chan and Kilizarego, Tilatica, the Moritica, Pinatica, Ninja Pilunirava, Daha Guna Pioge, Audita Suka, Yabuya, Lanjang. Then you have Santi Suka Yabuya, Lanjang Semabe. Pura Gura, the Lanjang Day Live without the day to look for Tarawe. The Chanda Matu Buddha Poguriado Loka Maboli, Eddie Chanda Muni, Sinzin. The Sayadaw to the lady, Shaji Jazo. Ludloya needed Pessan Chanda, the Ludio Soyabazo. You went la lady, the Lue, the Julia Dani Lue, and now Ayada, a tea to his roller. So nobody at a Lue Nine. To Mayada to Bowsy, you can get to the Bowsy, you're going to show you Yanni. Davi Melu, Eda Yi Tagadega, Kanzani, Jado Yodware. Mayobi Melu, Nasalina Ilum Kanzana Mala, Meiji Lucia. Nasalina Ilum Kanzana. Now you are Umare. 2 years there will be now you are Umare. 8 years there will be now you need a car. Nini Chacha, if you do have ye solution. In that day, to check the iron, a layer in a Kazaya or to have it no Chizamala. Pyong later, Eddie Ioni Kanzamala. No, the Poco, my below the water townless or Sinzabo. Pero China Mahofu. Popular Sir Nini Chacha, Yanjans or Apion a yada to a common knowledge, Yanjan, a chanda little canal. A was obviously, it will call it as but in I don't jad or as a it will call it as a cheat on Chichu. To my account in the robo. To the account Shipia Zamas, common Shipia Zamas, the Roda Shimajatafu. Quavo Tibe, Quavo H. Tima. Shimajata de Colita so there's a guy. Mashi Bulu and Yamala, the Rula Yelomia. Other Yelomia, Shenomia, the Chanda de Muha. Logama, Apio Chanda, she the Apio de Roma. Mingway lady. Maybe the Chinudi Lamsu. Tai Joy, the lady not of the Chinuda Mulamsu. That he can some with the Canada. And I had already not should be able to go Kia Bima, which I not level can be should be a cancer on your machine. A Yazari Sara had a machine or 2 years of zero. He said, Your Ayaboma, Ayabimelo. He said, Your colleagues or to do cancer on your machine. H.M. is solution. Busy level like April dollar. Jumbo le toilet April dollar. Nina purely come do the Chinese. Migong Jago, Nagong Yadago, Titwigong Kore. Are you about she? Nina purely come at a consumption. You know, I am going. Seguin or see the ladder or seguin them see you. I am going to Chopin, can be the Nini Chacha Apionida Logama Eddie Nijane Chanda Cussins in labor at the Kubashira.
Now we are practicing to make the kilesas of raga, dosa, and moha, greed, anger, and delusion, peaceful. The gross kilesas are being overcome with the training of sila. The medium level kilesas are being overcome with the training of samadhi. And the refined kilesas are being overcome with the training of wisdom. So this is the path that leads to avedita sukha, or it is the path to gain santi sukha. The Buddha himself followed this path and found that type of happiness. So for people who don't experience this type of happiness, by way of comparison, try to find a happiness like this in the world. And here's an example. Imagine that there's a person. The person has money, and for that person it's easy to get nice things to look at, pleasant things to listen to, beautiful things to smell, great things to eat, pleasant things to touch. That person has no difficulty obtaining what he or she wants. But experiencing these things again and again gets to be tiring, gets to be boring. Can you experience these things 24 hours a day? No. You have to take a rest. So the person goes to bed. They go to bed in their own bed and they go to sleep. And imagine that this person is sleeping quite soundly. And someone in his or her household comes and brings one of the things that he or she likes and wakes him up or her up. How does that person feel? That person will not be at all satisfied because he or she was having a good, peaceful sleep. And when the person wakes up, not being woken up, but wakes up after having a sleep like that, they even praise such a sleep. What a good sleep I had. However, if you were to ask, that person would not be able to explain if you asked, well, what's good about it? However, that person knows, and we know when we sleep well, we know that this exists. It's not something that can be explained, it's also something that can't be denied. So the happiness of a good sleep is something that happens in the world that is like the happiness that does not involve sense pleasures. So in the happiness of sleep, we're not seeing something beautiful, we're not hearing a nice sound, not smelling the beautiful jasmine flowers, not tasting good food, and we're not even aware of the soft bed. In fact, after one falls asleep, one might as well be on the ground or on the floor. So none of the things that one likes are being experienced during sleep, during this nice good sleep. There's not even imagination going on. So this sound sleep is a type of happiness that happens without involvement of the six sense objects. And this is the one type of happiness in the world that is like the happiness of avedita sukha.
Go midazu atwe pasanya Sauni Pilevoya and Nigame Lungakwe Mavoli Tenilo Loya Pima Kulenwane Sale Salona Eareva Winyanave, Becale Sare, Impiano Any Poko, Sagane, a Yumala, a Kane, a Yumalazura, which he have my way. Sameta Poko, Sagane, a Yumima, a Mesravoli. A meta Poko, a Kane, a Yumubido, and now you may put. A child of Tuja, Pizza Mother. A Pimalu, a Cane will be now you like be so she. All of you in any such a pure Doreca. Pimamuri le Piedora, Salamuti, or a pure to other Lube. Did not do it. I'm really Kanzava, the poet of the good and Kanzava. Todo, Tamia, Lolo, Pimabito, Piano, Pite, Pimura, Mahopo. Nini Chacha, if you are be solution, Joe, Ari, Pila, should learn to that. The Nini Chacha, Johnny Camaro, Seke, I only Kanzamu, Mishivene. Ninjane Chanda the Mule Elu College as Gatology, Duma Gaushi Navy Kaumu Piopia Zamas with the roller machine of who? Shipia Zama, Shinem Shimu, Shinamu, Dodo, Shiro Shinide. You look at my 88 Chanda, a Savomiaza, Tari, Chanda, the good Ripna Bauna Diago. You did see such an atology, eh? The war have a twin, eh? Yangon Bogule, so you that time, you did see such atology. Java, shoot the interpalo, shoot the little palo, the shoot the lalo, the lad Yaneva. You know, they not look up. That one, I know. Ediga Jaluchi, I'm not too young, Chanda, Shivala, Suravoli. Going now, let one man. For Roma, dear Atobi, the Deaga Tala, the Pogori, through Udanjuda, the Shida. Susuka, Nepana, Samasamuda, the Sita. Asoga, Wilson, Kema, Yata Duka, Nirojati. Born is such a singing body. Kona Awadita Sukha Kore Niban Chanda Mashi Pasima Shiu Kimitan and Kanza, Duka Mulam Shiu. I am only that we don't know Chanda, Davine Piano, Dore, Singeri, Juna Diari, Jotation of people like Tingara Dukari, Dukadari, Jonga, Siri, Madame, a goal. The neighbor might choke Yenny. But one is Saturday, you are the choke Yenny. Choke Yenny Chanda Susuka or that. Take on the take Chanda. The Chanda do the Pogo, take Chanda. Eddie Amagaja see the Chanda or Samasamuda, the sit down. Buddha Mesa Gora, Eddie Chanda to a video. Gora took for get Sikune Pola Ramofu. Samasamuda, the Sita look over it, a computer. I saw got it. Logama Pususia, the Miajiva, Joanna. Tatilu, Miatilu, Pisidi, Social, Jamai, Chudelu, Winia. I neighbor my Asoga, she would. Winia, she would. Would have said that Loga Masoluchi. When Mimi got treated. And yet, Jerry of Mowari body. Lojim of Yo Mowari. Same places of Munyo of Mowari, Medita of Mowari, Mana of Mowari, Manalo of Mowari, Shake of Mowari, Miyaji of Mowari. Mimi Boa, Pissing and it to Dali. There are results of Jerry body. Lama Tali, a pony, Mamialo, the Mialogy, do a poor Yama. Never my era you are, she would. Kilita, Mori, Mania, Burma, she do what I said. Came on Logama, Piania, Demiara, the Libero, Yebero, Sebero, Sadibori, Yoga Vero, Sony, a neighbor, my Kemasa, a very, so for a little she would. Edro computer, Edro going a piece on it, Chanda, Amagaji, Chanda, Yabuya, the Didiadi, Atoyada, Soraboli, Yogi, go to it, neighbor, to David Melo, Gona, Ubermalin, and dancing video body, April Chanda, the Savomas or Chanda, the new Buddha Gore, Shapubido. She had a whole out there, so I got it. 2 Malawi to go in a busy, Gizon is a whole out there, so. Could the other day actually county, man? Since I keep Tazogas or Zogarium, who is as a Gilita, Jedi, Canada, Chan and a Gilitari. The Mababia, Mamshu. The should take Canada and Yalibiani, Ajibe, Mayena, Utema Kema, Ija Tana, Ija Tana Yabido, the gate could win. Majane, ya lady, Ija, or Pirumi, a Palo Congress and a Jibo. Had a loop what Tambos at Amakamare, you did a lochiba. She says a lochiva. The new yogi is a lochiva. A mayonnaise also in Amamakamu. You know, you ne, says as a lofu. You did him lofus or Amamakamu. And a Josa Jabu, the need or at least somebody call it a tinia, ayo body. Ayo. Very dinyama Taukure Pupong Taukure, a say bindi. Very dinya yade Boguma a jump you body, a Jodi Yavuya, a jump you a Taugu say bindi, Eradi, piece of Shivu. Very Taugu say bindi ha. Chow say Pedia, Bales or about Nupanga Chama Sadune let me pause a video, Shinibabe. Say the Sony Neluchi, Pelu Taku, Archie or Lua Mesurari. Say the Tetra Neluchi, Pelu Taku, Archie or Lua Mesuri, Settle, nothing of Babalime, Dinero, David, Toja Uzu.
When one works all day to get money so that one can provide for one's family things like clothing and shelter and food, one works all day, and at the end of the day one is both tired and hungry. So one comes home from work feeling both hungry and tired. So what will one do? First, go to bed and take a rest, or will one have something to eat? And of course, there may be some people who are very fond of food and they will eat first. However, most people will probably first go to have a rest. And what happens when one has a rest after one goes to sleep both tired and hungry, but when one wakes up, one feels energetic and fresh. One both gets rest and one's hunger is relieved because of the rest. And Sayadawgyi himself experienced this, although it was not because he was tired out from working for his family, such as a wife and children. But he experienced how, after a good sleep, he felt both energetic and fresh. And so this type of happiness, this type of peace comes without any involvement of sense objects. And because we hear people say, what a good sleep, we know that it is good, because this is how people describe a sound sleep. So we know that this is good, and still we are not able to explain what this happiness is. However, one can't deny that it is good. And when we practice satipatthana, if we do so according to the instructions, respectfully, meticulously, continuously, one can gain this type of happiness. And for someone who is smart, then even in 1 week, one can gain this type of happiness. In 2 weeks, in 1 month, one can gain this. So one needs to work according to the instructions. And although one hasn't gained this type of happiness, when one gains it, one will know practically that there is this better type of happiness than sense pleasures. The way that Nibbana is praised, this happiness of Nibbana, is susukhang vatad Nibbanang, sama sambuddha desitang, asokang virajang kemang, yata dukkang nirojati. So, in Nibbana, suffering is not present. In Nibbana, suffering comes to an end. There's no obvious form of suffering. There's no suffering due to something changing. There's no suffering of sense experience. All these things die away, come to an end in Nibbana. So this is a happiness, susukhang vatan Nibbanang. This happiness is very good. This is a guaranteed happiness. It's the happiness that the Buddha himself taught, sama sambuddha desitang. It's described as asoka. That means that there's no sorrow, no sadness in this Nibbana. There's nothing gained and lost. Also, it's described as viraja. That means that there's no dust. These defilements, the defilements wanting various things, dissatisfaction, resentment, bearing grudges, pride, lack of shame, lack of moral fear, all these things are like little particles of dust in our existence. And they're like the dust that is on the road. So there's no dust like this, none of the dust of kilesas in Nibbana. And it's also described as kema. There are many dangers in the world, the dangers of fire, flood, thieves, and so on. There's no dangers in Nibbana, so it is called kema. And to get this happiness, this peaceful happiness that is described in such a way, we apply the practice. That's all we need to do. So the yogis haven't yet seen Nibbana, but by understanding this example, they can understand something about its peace. The Buddha himself found a happiness that is peaceful. And this, so one should just think about it. This happiness when your meditation is in a good situation, you can understand that there is this happiness that comes. It is free of sorrow. It is free of the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. It is free of all dangers. And when we get to this type of place, we feel very peaceful. So this is something that makes our human life very valuable. So try to apply the instructions in the practice and see what happens. One can't work half-heartedly. One can't work with sort of believing halfway. So one just has to try following the instructions, and one has to work respectfully. So today, Sayadawgyi has spoken about what it is that this knowledge called Sambojjhanga takes as its object, and also the person who gains this knowledge of Sambojjhanga. So in order to gain this knowledge of Sambojjhanga, there are supporting factors that arise together with it. And tomorrow, Sayadawgyi will explain about these supporting factors. And he will also explain how, when the mind is elated, what factors need to be boosted. When the mind is depressed, what factors need to be boosted. So this is all for today. Sadhu.